Welcome back. So today we're going to go over part 2 of the TinHiFi releases for the end of the year. And this one is C3. So C3, unlike C2, C2 had a metal shell with sharp angles. C3 is maybe more reminiscent of their T3 Plus. It's a very rounded, very smooth, kind of a stealthy looking, all in black with a carbon fiber faceplate. Yeah, very nice. It's actually very, very comfortable, very lightweight, very traditional shape for an IEM shell. Maybe the only thing untraditional is that you get the little wing there, which works for most people, but not everyone. So additionally, different from C2, C2 had a very basic looking cable, kind of a budget looking cable. C3 gets a very much upgraded SPC, silver plated copper cable, with nicer looking hardware. So overall, I think the price difference is $30. I think C2 is about $20 and this one is about $50. So about a $30 difference, and it kind of shows in the cable, and the rest of the accessories I think are probably about the same. What is different and slightly different from C2, the signatures are actually all different from these three. So these are the three releases for the end of 2022. So we started out with C2. So we talked about that last time. So C2 sort of has this, maybe the lighter, it's probably just a coupler artifact, a lighter sub bass. And I said that in the review. I think it just needs to go a little deeper than it does into the mids. It's got those nice, clean, sharp mids. Pin gain, again, is kind of clean and sharp. And then the upper treble stays at a level that's actually a little higher. It's a brighter sounding set to me. Wasn't my favorite just because the amount of energy that you get there in the upper treble. So T4 Plus, which is the third piece of this puzzle. And again, it's got this kind of lighter sub bass, very similar to C2 here, and very similar to C2 here, except it's just a hair down. So when you listen to T4 Plus, it's sort of a C2 with a bit less energy. And for me, that actually works out a little better. And what works out even better than T4 Plus is C3. So C3 actually gives you that depth back in the bass. So having those drums go a little bit deeper, a little more rumble, I think that is more generally appealing on C3, and it actually works better for me. Mids, again, are going to be kind of similar. You get a similar pin gain, and then you get a reduced version of treble as well. So what I would say is C3 is sort of the more general appealing of the three, because you get a little more bass. It handles more genres that way. It's a little more fun. You still get nice mids. You still get plenty of detail out of here, but you don't have the fatigue and everything being pushed in your face from the treble. So for me, C3 sort of hits the right line between all three of them, and I think it's just going to be the more generally appealing set of the three. So let's kind of get into it. So we talked about C2 last time, so C2 versus C3. When I talked about C2, it's that bright, sharper, digital sounding for detail chasers. So if you get on, you start doing your research for IEMs, and your first question is, what kind of detail resolution do you get? What's the best resolving of the three sets? If that's your first question, C2 is probably going to be for you. That's the one that is very bright and very sharp, and people who like to hear very sharp edges, who think they're getting a lot of resolve on their details, will probably gravitate towards C2. C3 is more for my style. It's more balanced, and it's just generally appealing, and it's well tuned as well. Anything that hits a balance point where you get a nice balance of bass and treble, and the mids are actually quite well tuned, balanced. That's kind of the set that I prefer. T4 hasn't really been officially released. I'm not sure what is going on with it. I tend to think that they're going to put it back in the oven and bake it for a little more. And really it comes down to this. It's really too close to C2. And I don't know what the price is going to be on T4 Plus, but it's way too close to C2. And like I said, it's a hair less bright, and it has stage height. So there is some advantage to T4 Plus, but I think that's a pretty tough sell, depending on what price, unless the two are exactly the same price, and I would take T4 Plus. But if T4 Plus is a significant amount of money over C2, then they should probably rethink that strategy. So most of my nitpicks on C2, for those of you who may have watched my C2 review, absent on C3. So again, this more generally appealing signature that isn't so bright, so in your face, works better for me. So there'll be less nitpicks here on C3 than I had on C2. Sound-wise, I'd call this TinHiFi's house sound, balanced, bright. I think TinHiFi has a pretty good knack for giving you slightly bright sets. They still sound balanced, but just slightly bright. And this one, same thing. It's instead of being perfectly balanced, it's just one notch bright. And I think that works well for them. I think they've sort of made a name for themselves, starting out with neutral sets, sets that are slightly bright. And again, I think this signature is pretty much in line with that. Again, more balanced this time, no single dominant contribution, allows you to hear more and turn it up to 11. So this one volume scale is much better than C2. There's no real bright spot. There's no over energy in the treble. And for me, that actually allows you to hear more because now you don't have this dominant overriding treble that is masking other parts of instruments and small details and small subtle details. And this one, it's sort of a hard concept to wrap your head around, but bringing the level down actually allows you to hear more. So bass, I do think TinHiFi finds dynamic drivers that can handle upper range very well. I think that's their thing. Like I said, their house sound is just slightly bright, and I think they pick dynamic drivers that tend to, do mids and above very, very well. But the low end is actually pretty good here. It's just not the priority. So without the brightness of C2, you can really hear the bass to the mids transition on this set, and you really feel that lower transition, a little bit more rumble, a little more bit body to the mid bass, without that overall brightness really masking everything. This one feels just better in the bass for me. A lot of that was really missing on C2. So one big nitpick, and big as in this isn't really significant at all, it's just a really nitpick. So the upper range, like I said, they focus on that a lot and it's very well defined. And I do wish the lower range, that lower mid bass and below was as equally defined. It's just a little loose. It's kind of a more fun sound. Just a hair tighter would match better with that upper range. But I think this one, again, is just going to be generally appealing. And that really works for bassier genres. And so I can't really fault them for it. But yeah, that would be my only nitpick on the bass, was just a bit tighter to match everything else would have been really nice. So the mids, I think these are what you would expect at $50. May not be super clean and sharp like C2, but these are just a bit more warmer, a little more organic. It doesn't have that digital sharp edge that C2 has, and it's just more natural to me. I don't have to pick and choose which tracks work. These mids are dynamic and balanced, and just enough separation to go to really handle many genres. And that was what I kind of complained about with C2 was it's okay for certain things, but the rest of it is just a little too hard to deal with on C2. And a track like this was one that didn't really work well on C2, Fleetwood Mac Dreams. You still get plenty of upper energy, but Stevie Nicks is now the focus. So you don't have all that treble energy masking out her voice and overriding her voice. She is back the focus of that song, and it sounds sort of as it should be, a much more natural presentation of that track. And this is really what balance should sound like when you can hear the details kind of at both the lower end and the upper end. And C2 was so focused on the upper end, very, very hard to hear any detail at the lower end. And then when you just bring that level down a little bit, like I said, you turn it down so you can hear more, and that's exactly what happens on this track. And without that dominant treble energy, you can actually hear more throughout the whole range, and it works really well on that track. Treble, again, just bringing that level down allows you to hear the upper and the lower treble, so everything is back in balance again. And it goes from that dominant contribution on C2 to an equal partner on C3, and that's just the way it should be. That's the way I like it. It's a nice level and extension for the price range. So not going to knock your socks off. It doesn't have that wow factor that C2 has, But C3 is probably going to work on more genres, and more people are going to find it appealing than that overabundance of energy that you got on C2. Also, what kind of fell out of that was the stage. So coming from C2, which didn't really have any height, it was basically very central. Everything was on top of each other. C3 has that height, and it could use more width and more projection because it's really sticky to your ears, but just giving the stage a little more space, a little more height, everything just sounds a little better. It's more engaging for me. Everything is just, a little more defined because there's not so much layering on top of each other. So yeah, I would, and I said the same thing about T4 Plus. That's really the advantages of T4 Plus over C2, is the stage is better as well. So I don't think, again, I think this stage isn't really one of those TinHiFi priorities. It kind of falls out of their tuning, and it seems to be hit or miss. And like I said, the width of it is kind of weird because it's very sticky to your ears. It doesn't really project out from your ears or in front from your ears. It's very much kind of right at your ears. And I think that's just a TinHiFi house sound, how they prefer it. So there you go. That's what I got on C3. So thank you again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.